it's gone. Maybe we're good. Okay, I think we're good. All right. So today we're gonna go through and talk about the buyer packet. So just as a reminder for you guys on Zoom, if you haven't already done it, is to put your name in the chat box. And if you haven't done so already, then your license number as well. Put your license number in the chat box as well. So and for you guys on Zoom, just a reminder too, camera has to be turned on so that you're in front of the camera the whole time. So anyway, any questions before we get started? Okay, sweet. Well, here's what we're going to do then. So we're going to go through similar to what you guys did last week on the seller paperwork. We're going to go through and talk about the buyer paperwork. And if you do have questions as we go, let's talk about them. But going to start out again with the reminder that I've given you on the REPC, and I'm assuming Jason probably gave you on the seller packet as well. But right at the very top of our exclusive buyer broker agreement, you see right here, it says, this is a legally binding agreement. Read carefully before signing designated agency brokerage. So just as a reminder, this is a legally binding agreement. Now, the thing though on this one that I will say that is potentially a little bit different than on the listing side is that typically on our listing agreement, it's pretty rare that we come across somebody that has listed their house with one person, but then actually sells it with somebody else, meaning that during the term of that being that listing agreement, like it's very, very, in fact, I don't know if I can ever think of a time that it's happened. On the buy side, though, it is not so uncommon to have a buyer sign this exclusive buyer broker agreement, and then they end up going and buying a house with a totally different agent. So just, I bring that up from the standpoint of, you know, like I said, I think part of where the difference of that comes into play is with a seller, when you go list somebody's house and you put your for sale sign out in front of their house, if another agent showed up to list the house, they're going to see your for sale sign out front and be like, hey, is this already listed? And or they would pull it up on the MLS and see that it's already listed. So we don't typically run into issues that way. But on the buyer side, it's not like the buyer has a sign in their front yard or on their car that says that they are using you or they've signed this exclusive buyer broker agreement that you're going to be their agent. So that's the reason I still bring this up. This is still a legally binding agreement, even though it probably more often, or well, for sure more often than with the listing side, will a buyer have potentially signed and a buyer broker and then go and use a different agent. So doesn't take away from the fact though, that this is a legally binding agreement, okay? Now, the other thing that I want to talk about on that piece of it as we get into this is a little bit of talking about the difference between procuring cause and then the fact that they've signed this exclusive buyer broker agreement. Because just because you have gotten somebody to sign an exclusive buyer broker agreement does not mean you automatically are entitled to get the listing side, the commission, the BAC from a listing that they go and buy. Okay. So I want to make sure you guys understand the difference there. We'll talk more about it when we get down to the commission section. But there's a difference between procuring cause, meaning who's entitled to the commission, and also from the standpoint of that the buyer will owe you a commission if they go buy a house. Okay. So just keep in mind, it's still a legally binding agreement. And in fact, we actually have a scenario going on right now within the company where somebody had signed this buyer broker agreement. They went and made an offer on a house. They ended up canceling. They got it accepted. They ended up canceling. I think everybody's had that. Everybody signed in. Oh, no, read it. Your accountant going, something's not on here. So we've got a scenario where that's happened, where the buyers went and made an offer, they then ended up canceling the offer. And they canceled it because this was happened back in basically May-ish, where they started to see interest rates shooting up, and the buyers started to think, oh, well, maybe I shouldn't buy right now. So they cancel. Well, now they're coming to us saying, we want out of this agreement. And our answer to that is, no, our agents worked really hard, done everything they were supposed to do. It's not like they have violated any part of this contract. Therefore, we're not going to release you from this contract. So again, coming back to, this is a legally binding agreement. It takes 2 signatures to get into it. So you've got to have the buyer sign, and then you sign on behalf of the company. So in order to get out of it, it takes both as well. Looks.
So why are these people asking the company to release them? This has a what's that expiration date? If they are not doing anything, should they work on it?
I like it. So say that again, sorry.
But why are they asking the company to cancel that? This has an expiration date. If they are not doing anything, it will die anyway.
Yes, and that's kind of what we're saying to them, is that because the buyer's saying we're not going to buy anyway. And so we're saying, well, then that's fine. You don't need out of this contract. Just let it expire. So we'll see what happens. But anyway.
Or do you think they have an ulterior motive?
Yeah,
somebody.
Yeah, that's a great question. Typically, when somebody calls us, the brokerage, trying to get out of one of these agreements, it's usually because they have another agent that they're wanting to work with, typically. And so if that happens, we usually will say, we will let you out of this and go work with another agent if you have one in mind, provided they'll pay a referral fee to us. We typically will do it. So, and to some extent, that's going to depend on you as the agent. If you as the agent are saying, no, I don't want to let them out, then we're probably going to stand behind you and say, no, we're not letting them out.
So Russ, am I understanding you're standing behind your agent saying that agent is still going to have to get paid something? Is that correct?
Yes, that is correct. That's what we are going to do, our best to try to get you paid still on a transaction.
Okay.
Yes, great. All right, so let's go through this. And really the way that I like to do it, I don't know how Jason told you he was going to do it, but the way that I like to do this is, to some extent, as we go through it with you guys, I want to answer questions that you have, but I'm going to explain it to you to some extent the way I do with if I were sitting down with a buyer. Okay. And the way that I like to think about this is, when you're sitting down with a buyer, or, if you're on the listing side with the seller, is I like to think of it as, really, they have 3 different options. They can read this whole entire thing if they want to, which is fine, because again, this is a legally binding agreement. Read carefully before signing. They want to, let them read it. The second thing I'll tell them is that they could just sign it if they want to, or I can explain to them what it says. And typically the clients will say, well, let's go through it and just tell me what it is that we're signing. Okay. But just know, if they want to read the whole thing, let them read it. And part of that as well is, keep in mind, which we have a lawsuit happening in the company right now that we went to a mediation a few weeks ago. And one of the things that the attorneys were talking about is, in Utah, and probably the rest of the country as well, but if you sign something, so once your client signs this, by signing it, they're acknowledging that they have read it and that they understand. Okay, so just know that them signing it, coming back later on to try to say, well, I didn't know what I was signing, is not going to really work, because by signing it, they're acknowledging they read it and they understood it. Okay, all right, so let's go through it. So the first blank line up here has got the buyer's name. So you're going to fill in the buyer's name here. But let me ask the question, and there's not necessarily a right answer, but I'll tell you what I think the right answer is, my belief of what it is. But what are we going to put in there for the buyer's name?
Their legal name that you're going to put on the receipt that the home is going to be titled under.
Okay, good. And here's how I like to think about it is, for me, one of the questions you want to know, if you don't already know, hopefully you do, but if you don't already know, when you're going to fill this out, is, have they already applied for a loan, if they're getting a loan? If they're going to be getting a loan, have they applied for a loan? And the name that you want to put on here should match the name of how they applied for the loan, is the ideal way we want to do this. So whatever their name they're using to apply for the loan in is the name I want right there. And just ask them, you know, have you already applied for the loan? And hopefully you'll already have even a pre-approval letter that will have their name on it, and you could use however the lender has given that to you, and it should be good. Okay. All right. Next, the term of the agreement. Buyer retains the company, including blank, which is obviously going to be your name as the buyer's agent, and as the authorized agent, and it's going to end at 5 p.m. on whatever date. So what date should we put in right here? Oops, if I can get it to high, well, I don't know why it's not working. Anyway, you can see where my mouse is. So how far out should we put? What should we put as a date?
It's been said, 3 to 6 months. I guess ours is it 6 months or whatever, or
Okay.
I don't know.
So I'm asking.
Yeah,
We always put 6 months because sometimes it can take time to find the right home.
Okay.
Get pre-approval, so if they don't have one yet.
Okay, good. Any other thoughts?
A year.
1 year?
I have had
Okay.
idea.
You put a year?
I have heard it. I haven't.
Oh, you've heard that. Okay.
Yes.
It depends on the next section.
Okay.
So let's say, because you can do it for not just generally, but you can do it, for example, for a specific property. So in the case of like, if you were working with an investor, they might not sign it for just broadly a whole county. They might sign it for, I don't know, just one specific property, and you might be doing a buyer broker for each individual time.
Okay, good. I like that. That is definitely a possibility, which I just realized. The one I pulled up on here that I'm showing you guys is different than the one I have. Oh, I didn't hand out to you guys. I did send out, but let me hand out to these.
I just noticed that it says or.
And that's what I was thinking. Should have been one.
Oh, yeah, I'm sorry. No, you didn't need to bring one. I just forgot to hand them out. Hopefully you guys on Zoom have them though. The copies of what you're looking at, but you can see it on the screen.
Yeah.
I was like, I've never seen that before.
The ones that I'm handing to you are more updated than the one on the screen. I just realized I didn't update the one on the screen, so. Okay, so, but let's finish the date first, then we'll go down to the sections A and B. Or A or B. So in terms of how long you're gonna do it for. Now, again, this is not, I'm gonna just tell you how I do it, doesn't mean that's the way you need to do it. You guys have said a year, I've heard 3 months, I've heard 6 months. Either way is fine, like you decide what you want it to be. I'm gonna just tell you how I do it, and again, doesn't mean that's how you need to do it. The way that I like to personally do it, and I'll tell you why I do it this way too. But the way I like to do it is when I get to this section, I like to just ask the buyer. So how soon are you wanting to get into a property? So I use that. If I don't already know, then I'm going to ask here, like, when are you wanting to close and purchase the property? Because if for some reason, if they said to me, hey, we need to find something in the next month, then I'm probably not going to do it for a year, if that's the case. If they said, I don't know, the next 2 or 3 months, then okay, that's going to vary. So for me, the way I typically like to do this now, and let me preface part of why I probably say this, of how I do it this way, or why I do it the way I do it is, for me personally, I'm more of a listing agent. I would rather go take listings than work buyers. And so because of that, I don't want to be stuck in a 1-year contract with a buyer for me, because I'm like, if you're not going to buy within a year, I probably don't want to work with you. like meaning if it's going to take you a year to buy, I'm probably not interested in being your buyer's agent, and I'm going to refer them to somebody else. So that doesn't mean that you need to follow the way I'm saying. But so for me, I always just ask them, when are you wanting to be into the property? And if they said 1 or 2 months, then I probably would do it for 3 or 4 months. If they said, in 3 or 4 months, then I might do it for 6 months. But just keep in mind, here's the main thing I want you guys to remember, as you're thinking about the dates you're gonna put in there. Is keep in mind our fiduciary duties that we owe to our client. That as whatever length of time you do this agreement for, you now owe them those fiduciary duties for the length of this contract. So let's say, for example, that you get somebody that you signed it for a year or even 6 months is fine, but 6 months to a year, and they want to go out and look at properties, but they don't buy. But they still want to keep looking at properties. What do you have to do? You have to keep showing them properties, right? Because that's part of your fiduciary. We have a fiduciary duty, which we'll talk about fiduciary duties more on Thursday. But which, by the way, I'm going to say this a couple of times today for Thursday. So we got a bunch of people on Zoom. For you guys that are on Zoom, if you can be here on Thursday in person, be here in person on Thursday. I promise you, you will enjoy the class more if you're in person, because Thursday we're going to play a game. So we're going to do what? Oh, I might get some snacks too. That probably would get them to come, huh? That probably would get them to come. I'm gonna really think about that. I think I might do it, actually.
Good idea.
It is a good idea, because I think we'll get more people to show up in person. But not just for the snacks, you'll have more fun if you're here in person, because we're gonna play a game. And I'm gonna put you guys into teams. So Thursday is really, the whole class is a game, but to cover the information. So anyway, if you can be here for you guys on Zoom, it will be more enjoyable. It'll make the class better if you're here. So if you can, be here. If you can't, then it's understandable, but I promise you'll have more fun. Okay. So we have a fiduciary duty of obedience. So if they want to go see a property, we got to go show them the property. So that's why for me, I typically try to keep the time frame on this. When I'm working with a buyer, I like it to be shorter. Now, so let's even go to, now that I told you we've got this client that's trying to get out of one of these. The agent signed it for a year. And I understand why in this case the agent did it for a year, and probably was potentially the right thing to do. But now that they're mad at him, like to some extent, I kind of think, and maybe I shouldn't have this recorded and hope it doesn't get out to somebody or whatever, but if they wanted to really get out of the property, this contract, probably all they would need to do is call this agent like every day. We want to go see this house. We want to go see this house. We want to go, like, to some extent, make the agent's life miserable to where the agent's like, yeah, I don't want to be in an exclusive buyer broker with you. Instead, they're just calling and being mean and trying to say, we just let us out, because, they're giving some reasons that aren't that great of reasons. But anyway, so in terms of that time frame, just know there are fiduciary duties you owe to the client, and if you're not going to do them, then you probably should cancel the contract. Now, on that, let's talk a little bit more for a second on that, because again, I brought up procuring cause versus just what the contract says. So on that, in terms of these fiduciary duties that we owe to them, what happens, let's say we've put it for 6 months or a year, that we put the expiration date to be out 6 months or a year. And let's say that we have this scenario that this client is that I was talking about, says they put a property under contract, they now cancel it, said we don't want to buy for a while. You then say, okay, and potentially don't stay in touch with them. At what point could the client look at that and say, I've been abandoned by my agent? And I don't know that there's a right answer, so don't, it's not like.
Reasonable time,
A what?
reasonable.
Yeah, I think that's probably a good way of saying it, is if a reasonable amount of time were to go by and you are not staying in touch with this potential buyer, and they went and bought with somebody else, could we come back on them trying to say you owe us a commission? Yes. But could they also say, I was abandoned by my agent? And so that's the thing, I guess, the main thing I want to say is whatever date you're going to put in there. So here's kind of the sum up the date. Whatever date you're going to put in there, recognize you owe them those fiduciary duties. And if you're not going to stay on top of that, then you probably shouldn't do such a long date. And so, anyway, that's just my 2 cents on that stuff. Okay, next,
Russ, a question.
yes,
Up here it says that it takes, it's basically effective on if it's section 15 below, which this one doesn't have a section 15, but it's stating that it's effective on signing
yes.
the agreement and exchange.
Yeah, that's what I'm saying. This one that I'm showing on the screen is actually different than what we're currently using, and I didn't realize till Christian brought up the A and B section here, and then I realized.
So by signing, I'm creating an agency with the buyer, but even though they may not even have a county or a property, I'm saying I'll work with you. This is the
Correct.
process.
Yep, you're just, yeah, all we're doing is agreeing you're going to be their agent throughout the process at this point. Yep, okay, good. All right, so the next section down,
So one last question.
yes,
When you said when the agent doesn't keep in touch with the client. How about when the client, you're trying to reach them and they don't answer, they don't respond to anything? Not because you don't want to, but because they are not responding. And then eventually you find out that they went somewhere else. What happens then?
okay, good. So yeah, so there's 2 ways, basically, so actually, let me pause for a minute. Did you guys on Zoom hear what Luz said? Or do I need to repeat? Is there
I
anybody-
heard her.
Okay, good. Okay. So I won't repeat that. Okay, so yeah, basically, there's 2 ways in which this could become an issue where you might not get paid. One was the abandonment, the other one it would be estranged. So if you became estranged from them. So typically the way that happens is them doing what you're saying. They just quit responding to you altogether. That potentially could be a way of them trying to sever this relationship. But as long as you could show, hey, I was still there doing it, it was them that disappeared on me, basically, you're gonna be fine.
Okay,
You
kind
could
of
document it. Just
Correct.
document.
Correct.
like showing the text that, hey, I'm texting them, calling.
Yeah,
them.
phone record showing shows that I tried to call them on this date. Here's a text that I tried to, here's an email, that I've been staying in touch.
But
They
don't.
just estranged themselves from me.
I have a question. I believe, and I don't know if it is or not, in Utah, is there a max, I think, time regulated by either law or boards for that to like prevent like predatory practices? So I'm just saying, can't get a client and then it turns out that they've signed one previously for like 5 years.
Yeah, so that is something that's somewhat in the works right now, I would say, Christian. I don't think there's anything right now that would stop you from doing that. And part of that is part of why I say I think there's something in the works right now. Something that is going on across the country. I don't think it's happening as much here, but that I think is going to probably start happening here, which is why our legislature and our people are trying to get ahead of it to stop this. But what is going on, as I tell you this, you're going to be like, that's a really good idea. We should go do that. But probably don't. But is what people are doing across the country is they're going to sellers and at marketing saying, we will give you $1,000, $5,000 today if you'll agree that if you sell your property in the next, and I don't remember if it's 10 years, 15 years, 20 years, might be even longer than that, that we'll give you $5,000 today, but you have to agree that if you sell your home in the next 10 years, you're going to use me as your agent. And then they go and actually file a notice on the property so that if something were to happen to that they were trying to sell it, that they now have a lien saying basically you owe me $5,000 or however much, 1,000, whatever it was. But it just kind of as a way, think of it as kind of like doing a car title loan type of a thing. It's almost like you're doing that with your house, just guaranteeing them that if you sell the house, you will then use them to do it. And so, yeah, so there is some things in the works where they may try to say, hey, you can't sign that type of an agreement for longer than X number of months or years or something. But I don't think there is anything right now in place. So you probably could go sign it for somebody for 5 years. The downside to that is what I was telling you before is you now owe them those fiduciary duties. And if you aren't staying in touch with them, they would have a place, a leg to stand on to come back and say, I'm not, this is no good because we didn't do our part of the contract. Okay. All right, good. All right, so then the next piece of this is after we put in the date is we're saying that it's for helping them locate property or negotiating the acquisition of property, either A, in blank counties is what the new form says, county or counties, so that you could write any or, any Utah counties or any counties in Utah, however, if you wanted to write any, you could, okay? But you can also just put Salt Lake County, Davis County, Utah County, Weber County, whatever county it is, Washington County, whatever.
But any can be put, right?
But you can use any counties, Utah, okay? That way you're covered for the whole state. Or you have the option of B to just say for if they buy this specific property. So here's what I like about that is for years and years and years, we didn't have that. It just had basically any county in Utah is if you bought a property, you owe us a commission basically. But the challenge with that is sometimes you will have people who are hesitant to sign this buyer broker agreement. And so for me, I would say to you, don't go show properties to people who have not signed this. Even if it is at a minimum that you're doing it, which is kind of what Christian was bringing up, is that you're doing this section B here, where you're saying, I'll go show you these 2 or 3 properties, but I need you to sign the buyer broker saying that if you buy that house or those houses, that you're going to use me as your agent. And if they won't sign that, why would that be a problem? Like, why should that be a red flag to you if they're saying, no, I don't want to sign, I don't want to be trapped in this agreement.
They don't,
For you, even if it's for this one property, they aren't willing to sign it.
they don't want to work with you. They are just choosing.
Yeah, to some extent, what's happening is that's the red flag that they're probably not going to use you. So let me give you a quick story on that. So I've mentioned before that I sat on the grievance committee and I'm on professional standards now over at the board. A number of years ago, probably 6 or 7 years ago now, maybe even longer, but we had somebody file saying that they should, this was basically an arbitration saying I should be owed the commission. And the reason they were saying they should be owed the commission was what the story was this. They picked up this buyer, and I don't remember where they found the buyer, but they took him out and they showed him properties. And at the end of showing them some properties, they tried to get him to sign the buyer broker. They said, okay, I went and showed you these properties. I'd like you to sign this buyer broker agreement saying that if you buy, you're going to use me. And the buyer says, no, we don't want to do that. The agent says, okay, that's fine. Goes and finds some more properties, takes them out another time, shows them properties. At the end of showing the properties, asks them again to sign this. The buyers say, no, we don't want to be committed to anybody. Okay. The agent goes in a third time, finds properties, goes out and shows them properties. When they get to the last house that they're looking at, they go inside and look at it. They come out and right across the street was a new neighborhood being built and they see a model home. And they say to the agent, oh, we want to go look at that model home. So the agent walks over with them, goes into the model home. They look around at the model home, they leave. The agent had, I think, given their card, or I don't remember how exactly. Somehow the model home agent knew the buyer's names. Maybe it was just they just introduced themselves, but they didn't sign in or anything. So the next day, the agent gets a phone call from the model home agent and says, was such and such, these people, was that the people that you brought in yesterday? And he said, yeah, that's who I brought into the model home. And the model home agent said, oh, well, I just want to let you know, we just got an offer on one of our properties that has their name on it, but it has a different agent as representative, not you. So the agent says, oh, well, who's the agent? The model home agent says. The agent hangs up with the model home agent, calls the agent who is on the contract, says, did you just write an offer for these people on this new construction? And the agent says, no. And he's you didn't? No. Oh, okay. Hangs up, calls the model home agent back and says, I just called that agent. And he said that he didn't do that. And The model home agent says, well, I've got the contract right in front of me. It's got his name on it. So agent hangs up, calls that other agent back and says, I just talked to the model home agent. They said it has your name on it. The agent says, oh yeah, I'm sorry. I didn't realize my assistant did that. So my assistant wrote the offer and I just they hadn't told me they had done that yet. And the agent said, well, but I'm the one who showed the property. And the agent who then wrote the contract, or the assistant that wrote the contract for the agent said, well, these guys work at this specific grocery store, and anybody that works at that grocery store that's going to go buy a house, they always use me. So they were planning to use me the whole time. So that's why the agent now files this request saying, hey, I should get paid the commission on that. So what do you guys think on that? Should they or shouldn't they?
Yeah.
That's how
She has a leg to stand on.
he did the work, but he really didn't legally was covered. I mean, he didn't register himself in the model home because you should register, right?
Yep, you
Say,
should
like,
register that.
I brought these people, so there's a record that you were there. And I think in the other instances where they refuse to sign anything, why would you keep showing them anything?
See, that was my question. So for me personally, when this one came to the grievance committee, so it was for us to decide, should it go on to a hearing? And I kind of regret now, looking back on it, I kind of think we should have let it go to a hearing, but we didn't. My argument sitting on the committee was the agent showed them 3 times asked him to sign it, 3 times they told him no. Like in my mind, I was like,
In a way.
that should have been a red flag, like, I'm not
Why
showing
would
you
you-
more properties if you don't. Now, but looking back on it now, back then, I would say I don't think I fully understood procuring cause the way I do now. I just looked at it as, hey, you tried to get them, they were telling you we're not gonna use you the whole time. You just didn't get it. Like, it's kind of in dating, like the girl kept telling you, I gotta do my hair. I can't go to a movie because I gotta wash my hair tonight. Like somewhere along the way, you gotta get the hint. She's not interested, right? So,
You see her there with somebody else.
yeah, right. So anyway, like we didn't pass it on. Looking now at it though, understanding procuring cause, I'm like, we probably should have let it go on to a hearing and evaluated the whole thing, but anyway. So here's my point though. For me personally, I just feel like if they're not willing to sign it at minimum for the property, then you might want to question it. Here's the other thing that you can do too, so going back to the date up here is keep in mind, even though we talked about 3 months, 6 months, a year, all of that, there's also nothing stopping you from doing it for 2 weeks. Of just saying to a buyer, let's sign this agreement if they're hesitant. I wouldn't just do this automatically, but if they're hesitant in signing, I'm gonna probably, before I even try to go to a specific property, I might say to them, well, let's sign it and do it for just 2 weeks. Let's do it as a trial period for 2 weeks for you to see if you like me as an agent, but it also gives me a chance to see, do I want to work with you as the client? So keep in mind, you can do that as well. Just don't forget, if you do it as short time period like that, you may need to do an addendum extending it. But so anyway, just the point being, there are multiple of options there to get this signed. If you're going to go show people properties that don't necessarily have to have them be locked in for a year on every property. Okay, you could do it for a shorter time period. You could do it based on the properties, but at a minimum, get that. Now, part of why I say that too, I'll explain later as we get to some other sections that we're experiencing right now with other complaints within the company that I'll come back to. Okay. All right. Section 2.
So, sorry.
So we only spent
So I have a
6 minutes on.
So, sorry, Ross, so located at, if you don't want to do a specific property, is that okay to put to be determined?
In section B.
Yeah, in section,
Well, if you're gonna do that, just don't put anything, do A.
also don't put anything.
Yeah, just you could do. Just if you do section A, because you notice it's A or B.
Okay, so with that, then.
Yeah, if you put in any counties, Utah, then you
put-
don't need to put anything on
Okay.
located at.
Okay.
Yeah.
What do you mean?
So Russ,
Yeah, go ahead.
So you would handle that like with an extension, you do an addendum to extend it?
Correct. You do an addendum to the buyer broker agreement and put the expiration date of the contract to be, and then you'd extend it out 3 months or whatever, however far you want to go.
So you'd want to get the contract signed within that time period that you were the agent,
Correct.
correct? Okay.
You got it. All right, section 2, brokerage fee. So in this section, what it's saying is that they're gonna owe us 3% of the acquisition price plus. This one shows $495, but you can do the $295 or $595, $6, whatever you want to do on that. But this is saying they're gonna owe us that, and the way that that's gonna work is it's gonna be 3% or whatever's being offered on the MLS, whichever is greater. So if on the MLS was offering 3.5 or 4, then that's what it is. So what does that mean if on the MLS it was offering 2.5?
Have to be 2.5 right there,
No, that they.
unless they decide they say I'm gonna pay you more.
Yeah, so here's how I would say to handle that. Is for me, I like making sure that it is at 3% on here. And then you want to have the conversation with the buyer of, we may come across properties that are offering less than that amount. So when that happens, I need to know, this is how you want to handle it with them, is saying, I need to know from you how you would like me to handle that. Do you want me to not show you properties that have offered less than that? Do you want to pay the difference? Or will you authorize me to go to the agents who are offering less than that and try to negotiate to get them to raise that up, what they're offering, the BAC basically up to 3%. So here's the point of what I'm saying is have the conversation with your client as to what they want you to do. So let me give you a scenario that I had with that. So this was a friend of mine's son and his wife. I was helping him look for townhouses out in Riverton. And we go out and we look at one, and this is back when like almost everything was 3% years ago. And so I honestly never even looked at to see what was being offered on BAC because it was always 3%. Like it was almost never not. Occasionally you would come across, but that was so rare that I just didn't ever worry about it because it was 3%. So we pull up to this townhouse, we go inside, and I could tell the way that they're looking at it, they really like it. So at that point, when I'm like, oh, they're getting serious. So now I look down on the MLS to see what the BAC is, and it was 2%. And I was like, oh, dang it. Whatever. So they get done looking at it. We walk outside, we're standing outside, and they say, we think we want to write an offer on this. And let us just think about it tonight, and then we'll follow up with you. I said, okay. And here's the thing. Because it was offering less than 3%, I just said, okay. Now, had they been offering 3%, I might have said something like, hey, well, the good news is, you can think about it more than overnight. We're going to have a whole due diligence period you can think about it. So you're not committed just because we write an offer and get it under contract. You're not out anything. Let's write the offer. But because they were offering less than 3%, I was like, okay, you can think about it. Let me know. So I go home. I get a phone call from the listing agent, says, can you give me feedback? Now, here's why it's important you've had this conversation here of how do you want me to handle it if they're offering less than 3%? So the agent calls and says, can you give me feedback? And I said, yeah, they're actually pretty interested in the property. Here's the problem. So actually, take it back. They were offering 2.5. It wasn't 2. I said, close enough. I said, here's the problem is they've signed a buyer broker agreement with me that says they're going to owe me 3%. You're only offering 2.5, which means they're going to have to pay me the other 0.5% for the commission. They're not sure that they have enough money to do that if they buy your house. So they might not buy your house just because they don't have that extra 0.5%. And he then got really mad at me, said, you're not looking out for your client's best interest. You're putting your own interests above theirs. And really I wasn't, because the truth is, if they would have called me and said, we want to buy it, I would have written the offer. But because we had had conversations about, okay, if it's less than that, how do you want to handle it? I'm authorized then, they've given me permission to then go and talk to them about, hey, we need to get this commission up. So just have those conversations so that you can do that, which now here's the interesting thing. You know how now our listing agreement shows the total commission and then down below, we're going to offer X amount as to the buyer's agent? I love that we've done that because back then I got thinking after I hung up the phone with this guy, and I didn't think about it while I was on the phone, but he was saying I was not looking out for my client's best interest. When in actuality, I was like, did you tell your client you're only offering 2.5 on the MLS instead of 3? And that most agents are not going to show your, because back then agents wouldn't, if it was less than 3, they would just not show it, which you shouldn't do. I want to make sure I'm clear on that, but that's the reality of what happens. So I wish I would have thought to say, did you tell your client that you're not offering 3 and that agents are going to walk away from your property because of that? Because quite honestly, I probably could have gotten them to write an offer on that property, but I just didn't ever call them back. And the next day they were like, hey, we found a different house we want to go after. Okay. Like I didn't push it. So anyway, just the point of this again being, we're going to get paid 3% or whatever's offered on the MLS, whichever is higher, whichever is greater. Okay. So if you want to make sure you're having the conversation with your buyers of how do you want me to handle it? Now, at the end of the day, I'm not going to stop the client ever from getting the house that they want to get. But somewhere along the way, you've got to draw a line somewhere, though, because what if, like I saw one on the MLS from a company that shall not be named, but you'll probably know as soon as I say this. I saw one that they were offering $1. BAC was $1.
Are you kidding?
So are you going to do that? Like to some extent, that's why you got to have these conversations, because the buyer's saying they're going to pay us 3% on this, less whatever we get from the MLS. So they're now going to owe you 3% minus $1. Like, are you going to really go do that? So you got to have these conversations with your clients of how do you want me to handle it, and use that as the example of, hey, there was one time that one was offering $1. Do you want me to show you those properties that if they're offering less than, and you could decide what the amount is, but at the end of the day, like as a company, I don't want you guys going and selling a house that you're going to make $1 on, because then you'll split it with us and you'll get 50 cents or whatever. So anyway, you got to have those conversations with your client. All right. Next, protection period. How long should we put in there? If within blank months. What are you guys putting?
I put 3 months.
3? What do you put, Rita?
I put 3.
Okay, what is Jessica?
3.
3, okay. Yeah, so there's not necessarily a right answer. For me, I usually do 1 month, but I would say at least do a month, if not longer, but at least a month, I would say. We had one agent in the company recently put 0 in there. And then here's the sad thing. His contract expired and the buyers went and bought a listing that he had shown them like the day before their contract expired, or a couple days before contract expired. The agent came to me saying, hey, can we still go after it? Because I showed the property, I should be entitled to the commission. But the problem is when I looked at protection period, they put 0. So I said, you didn't give yourself any type of a protection that way. So I would say at least do a month. 3 is probably more the norm that most agents do, but at least put something besides 0, I guess is what I would say. Okay. All right.
It's a lot of cutthroat like clients out there.
There are that, unfortunately, there's not a lot of them that they show, but when they show up, it seems like there's a lot. I think that's the problem. I don't think there are a lot. It just feels like there's a lot.
Wait, can I ask a question about the protection period? I still have a bit of a hard time understanding. Is that like after your agreement has expired? Like if they decide that they want to go buy one of the homes that you showed them or something like that, but is that only if it's something that you have seen with them or?
Correct. Yeah,
Okay.
so what this is just saying is if within blank months, so let's say 3 months after the termination or expiration of the exclusive buyer broker, buyer or any person acting in their behalf enters into an agreement to purchase, exchange, obtain an option on, lease any property as referenced section above, located for the buyer by the buyer's agent or the company. So it's, yeah, any of the properties that you had located for them. Yep. All right, good deal. All right, section 4, buyer's representation disclosure. This one is where the buyer is warranting that they, and this one's crucial. This one, the buyer is warranting that they have not entered into this agreement with anybody else. So it's probably a good idea. I think you should make sure to train your buyers with that, hey, by signing this, any agent that you come in contact with, because part of what they're agreeing to right here is the buyer will, in all communications with other agents, notify them in advance that the buyer's entered into this. So when you went to the code of ethics training at the board, they trained you of, you need to ask everybody if they've signed a buyer broker agreement. That's actually, they actually train it at a higher, like, they scare you a little bit more than they probably need to. Our code of ethics actually says that you have to ask before providing a substantive service. Then it puts in parentheses, writing an offer or presenting a CMA. So you technically don't need to ask somebody if they've signed a buyer broker until you're going to provide a substantive service to them. Now, this though says the buyer will, in all communications with other real estate agents, notify them in advance that they've entered into this. So train your clients. When you're having them sign it, tell them anytime you talk to an agent, and this is how I tell my clients. When you come in contact with an agent, tell them you've signed this and they should leave you alone. And if they don't leave you alone after you've told them you've signed this, then let me know, because once they know that you've signed a buyer broker, they shouldn't bother you anymore. Yep, go.
What I ask is if they are working with any other agent.
You ask if they're working with any other agent? Okay.
Or do you have an agent? Are you working?
See here, how I do it is I ask them for an appointment. I just, hey, when can we get together and talk more about what you're wanting to do? And if they're working with an agent, they should at that point say to you, oh, we've already got an agent we're working with. So I find out by asking for an appointment. Is how I find out if they're working with an agent.
Before I make the appointment, I ask.
That's okay. People do. All right. So what they're representing to us is that they haven't signed one, that they will notify every other agent out there that they have, that they'll give us with any relevant financial information. They'll exercise care and due diligence in looking at properties and all of that kind of stuff. Okay. And also they're agreeing that they will sign the buyer due diligence checklist, and that they will disclose to you any properties that they have either negotiated to acquire or have an interest in acquiring. Okay. All right. Section 5. Duties of the buyer's agent. When I get to this section, I always just tell them that I'm looking out for your best interest. So what this is saying is I'm your agent. I'm going to be looking out for your best interest. We're not negotiating against each other. We're on the same team. That's how I usually explain that section. Then duties of a limited agent, I just explained to them in the event that you go and find or wanted to see a property that I have listed, I would then in that case potentially become a limited agent. Or if they were to show, or excuse me, to look at a property that is listed by Century 21 Everest, then Everest would have to be limited in that scenario. Okay. Number 6 is professional advice. Now, here's how I do this one. When I get to this section, what I tell the clients, and I'm not joking, this is really what I say. When I get to this section with the clients, I say, what this says is don't trust anything I tell you. And usually they go, what? And I say, yeah, basically what it's saying is I am trained in the marketing of real estate. I'm not a property inspector. I'm not a surveyor. I'm not an electrician. I'm not a plumber. I'm not a CPA. I'm not an attorney. Like any of those type of questions, you're going to want to talk to a professional. And then for me, if I'm sitting down with the client, when I get to this section, I'll now pull out the buyer due diligence checklist form and have them go through and sign the due diligence as at the same time when I'm explaining this. But I always start it with saying, this section basically says, don't trust anything that I tell you. Now, here's the thing though. Now we go out and look at properties, and when we're out looking at a property and somebody says to me, hey, is the property line go right? Da, 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 da. I always go, remember that section in the contract that I said, don't trust anything I tell you? And then they usually kind of laugh and go, oh yeah. And I'm like, this is what it's referring to. Like, I can tell you where I think it is, but don't rely on that that's where it is, because I'm not a surveyor. Like, I might go out to the sidewalk to show them, well, here's where there's a pin, and usually the pin is where showing the property line. But if you're really concerned, you need to get a survey, okay? All right. Dispute resolution. On this one, this is saying that we agree that in the event that there's a dispute between the buyer and us, that we would first go to mediation before going to court, okay? Next is attorney's fees. This one says that in the event that we do end up in court, the prevailing party is entitled to having their attorney's fees covered. Now, if for no other reason you get your exclusive buyer broker agreements signed, this is why we want to get it signed. So we have a scenario going on right now in the company where one of our agents had a listing. They got an offer in. At the same time they got an offer in, somebody called them off the listing. Just a buyer called off the listing and said, I want you to represent me and help me get this property. The agent said, okay, I can do that. I'll write an offer. I'd have to be a limited agent. So he writes the offer, fills out the limited agency form, submits it. The offer comes in to the seller, and they're now in a multiple offer. So our agent tells his buyer and the other agent and their buyer, you're in a multiple offer situation. His buyer said to him, will you reduce, this was before I think you do it as in a multiple offer, but he said, will you reduce your commission a little bit? I think he said 1%, because you're representing me. So instead of getting a 6% commission, you'll get a 5%. And our agent said, no, that doesn't really have anything to do with this. So no, I won't do that. Well, he writes the offer, says that he will pay an X amount of dollars over any other offer. So they get the offers in, the seller's evaluating the offers. The seller happens to think that he knows this other buyer and said it's kind of a loose cannon. And so I'm not sure that I want to accept an offer from him. So let's go with this other offer. So now they accept the offer from another agent, which means our agent's going to make what? More or less money? Less, right? So they go with it, fine, accept it. This buyer now, though, comes back into town and was out of town. They tried to get a hold of him to say, are you sure you want to pay X amount? Whatever. Comes back into town, says, our agent says, hey, sorry, didn't work out. The seller decided to go with a different offer. Well, this guy's upset. How? Why? Why would they go for a different offer when I offered X amount over any other offer? And there was no cap, so it didn't matter. I would have paid it. The seller just decided they wanted to go with that one. I don't know. Well, he's now convinced that our agent did it because he asked him to reduce his commission, which makes 0 sense because he still would have made more money if that offer got accepted. So that client is now suing us and the agent. So suing Everest and the agent, basically saying that he didn't represent him. He didn't give him his fiduciary duties of looking out for his best interest, blah, blah, blah. Well, here's where this is a problem. It's a stupid, in my opinion, it's a stupid lawsuit because the seller knew what offer they were choosing. They were fully aware of it. They just decided to go with a different offer. Well, here's the problem. This guy's now suing us, so we're incurring attorney's fees. And we thought about saying, well, good, we could do a countersuit to go back to say, you got to pay our attorney's fees. Here's the problem. Our agent did get a limited agency consent signed, did not ever get a buyer broker signed.
Oh, gosh.
Without this section, we now have no leg to stand on to go back and say, you got to pay our attorney's fees. So if nothing else, get a buyer broker signed so that if we do end up in a lawsuit, hopefully you won't. But anyway, yeah, kind of crazy. Our agent just didn't do it. I don't know why, just didn't. Got the limited agency signed, just didn't ever get the buyer broker signed. And so Anyway, so we can't countersue, so we're gonna spend a bunch of money. For nothing, cause it'll go away, I think, but.
Sellers are right, though, people scanning.
Yeah, well, that was just it. That's what, to some extent, the seller is like, that's why I didn't take the offer, is
Yeah.
I was worried I would end up in a lawsuit, so. We just have to hope the seller will get our back to say, yes, I knew what I was doing and I chose this other offer. The problem is. The buyer over here reached out to the seller and under social media, just kind of said. Hey, like, why did you not take my offer? And the seller didn't flat out say, because I didn't want to work with you. If they would have, I think the whole thing would go away. If the seller would have just said, I knew, I just didn't want to work with you. They just said, yeah, sorry, it didn't work out. And that gave them more fuel to the fire to feel like our agent did something wrong, which didn't. So anyway, we'll see where it goes, but all right, next, buyer authorizations. This section is they're authorizing us to disclose to the MLS after closing what the purchase price of the property was. Why do we need that permission?
Aren't we non-disclosure?
Correct. Because we're a non-disclosure state, without that permission, we couldn't put it on the MLS. And we want it on the MLS, so don't go striking that out. And then the other thing they're authorizing us in section B of this section is that we can contact them about the purchase of property, meaning it gets us around the do not call list. And then it also, they give us permission to put the money in an interest-bearing account that we would then donate the interest to the UAR HOF, which we don't do right now, by the way. We looked into doing that a few years ago to creating a scenario where all of the earnest money would get interest on it, and then we could donate it to UAR HOF. But the red tape involved in that was so much that we finally just said, we're not going to do it. So we have the permission to do it because of this section, but we currently are not doing it, just so you know. All right, section 10, there are or are not additional terms. So if there's not, just check the are not box. If there are, then you'll check the are. So you know, this would be an example. Remember we said up there in the section about if they had an interest in acquiring other properties or something. So this could be a scenario where maybe somebody said, a buyer said, well, hey, I'll sign this, but if I go buy this for sale by owner that I saw last week, I don't want to have to pay you a commission. In which case I would check there are additional terms, get the addendum to this and say the property located at, you know, whatever address XYZ is not subject to our this agreement. Okay. Equal housing opportunity says that we'll comply with all the federal, state, and local fair housing laws, and that they will as well. Electronic transmissions and counterparts is where they're giving us permission to use .loop to email documents, whatever gets signed that way. Due on sale clause. So on this one, really, you're only going to use this or spend much time explaining it to your client if they're looking at doing a seller finance or a lease option. If they're not doing that, then really the due on sale clause, this section doesn't really mean much to them. So what's the purpose? What is, first, I guess, let's make sure you understand though. What is due on sale clause? Yeah, so, and why would we care? Why should the buyer care about a due on sale clause if they're doing a lease option or seller finance?
Because they're financing, they can't get financed, they can't buy the property or to pay for it, I guess.
Well, yeah, so if you were doing a seller finance and that note gets called due and payable, and the buyer can't then go satisfy that, pay off the seller's mortgage, or the seller couldn't pay it off, they're potentially gonna, and the house gets foreclosed on, they'll lose everything that they put into the property. So that's the idea. Same thing on a lease option, is because you're giving option money, that if it got foreclosed on, you would now lose your option money on that as well. So really, like I say, where it says at the top, there are certain types of transactions may trigger that. If you're just doing the traditional sale, this section really doesn't matter. But just if for some reason you were going to do a lease option or seller finance, really make sure you explain that section to the buyer. All right, section 14 says this is the entire agreement, including the buyer due diligence checklist form And I thought maybe we don't have it on here. Oh, it's still, okay. So yeah, section 14 just says that this document, along with the buyer due diligence checklist, constitutes the exclusive buyer broker agreement, okay? And then the effective date down here is saying that that's what, but I think that what you guys have is different now, right?
Yeah.
It doesn't have that, section 15, right? Right. So we'll skip that. All right, they're gonna sign it, you're gonna sign it, and before you flip the page, notice in red at the bottom, it says, do you have a real estate need or a property to sell or purchase outside of the market area or the state of Utah? So the idea of that is just a reminder for you guys to asking the client if you can get an outgoing referral for them. Okay, because if they're coming from out of state and they have a property they need to sell from out of state, you could send the outgoing referral and get paid on. Okay, so that's just there as a reminder for you.
So Ross.
Yeah.
Since this doesn't have the 15, which one is the more, the one that we should be?
The one you in your hand. Yeah,
The 15 is.
yeah, it's gone. 15's gone. We took care of it up in the upper section. All right, next, so this is the buyer due diligence checklist. So again, just as a reminder, as a notice from the company, the buyer is advised that the company and its agents are trained in the marketing of real estate. That we're not inspectors, all that kind of stuff. So with this form, when I get to it with the client, I just explain to them, here are some examples of things you might want to consider. And there are professionals that you might want to talk to if you have questions on any of these type of things. Then talk to a professional, and it's not me that you want to rely on. And a lot of times agents will get themselves in trouble because at a home inspection, which is why typically I recommend don't go to a home inspection. Like you should probably, if you're new, you should probably go to a 1 or 2 just so you kind of know what goes on. But after that, it's like, I recommend go at the end, but don't be there for the home inspection, because where agents get in trouble is maybe a inspector looking, says one of the plugs like, oh, it's got reverse polarity on it. It's wired backwards or whatever. And an agent goes, oh, that's no big deal. You don't need to worry about that. And then the house burns down because of it. And then they're going to come back and go, oh, well, you as the agent said, don't worry about it. Okay. So here's the other thing I would tell you. The way I look at this form, this buyer due diligence checklist, that is a get out of jail free card for you. Is in essence, if somebody did try to sue you over saying something from an inspection, we're going to come back on this form right here to say, we disclosed, don't rely on this. Now, I don't know that it's 100% going to get you out of jail for free, but we're going to do our best. But that's the idea of this, okay? This is just a, hey, we are not experts in all things of a house, therefore don't rely on me. And so for you guys, I would say don't give advice. If somebody starts asking stuff, go back to, you know what, there are professionals and I'm not the one to rely on.
So basically, Ross, will this be a list of suggestions to the client, what kind of inquiry they can be doing about the house?
Yeah, so yes, so think of that buyer due diligence checklist as, these are just some suggestions of things you might want to consider. The other thing it says on that form is, there might be other things in addition to that. So this isn't like the end all be all, that these are the only things you should consider, but this is an example of some of the things you should consider. And I think that's a good way for you to explain it to your client is, here's a list of some examples of things that some buyers find important. So take a look at it, see what you want to do. All right.
In here, there's not termites, right? Termites.
No, so we do have on, and in fact, I think I need to even update the form that you guys have on this, because the next form we're going to look at is this receipt and acknowledgement of buyer due diligence. And the new one, which I don't think is in this packet yet, has termites on there. So here's what I like. So this next form, this receipt and acknowledgement of the due diligence, this is just another layer of protection for you as an agent, because not only now will they have signed the buyer due diligence, we're going to have them go through and initial a bunch of things on here. about this, I hereby understand and acknowledge my right to a home inspection, we have initial, home warranty, have initial, inspection, mold, radon, all of that, oh, it does have term rate on it. So maybe I do have the right one here, and you
You
guys.
have the, you gave us the land one.
Oh, did I give you the land?
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking like, I don't know.
Oh my God, I'm sorry,
Yeah, because. that's-
I'll get it updated, in fact, I better circle that right there, so. I don't-
The catch, Marcy, it says land.
Okay,
This is land.
yeah, sorry about that,
Yeah, because it says geological test.
yeah, sorry.
and
Wrong
Surveying
one.
and
Okay.
staking, I'm thinking, what?
So the receipt, so this one, we're gonna have them go through an initial. So now, again, in the event you ended up in court over something. We're gonna first pull out the buyer due diligence to say they already signed. Then we're gonna have this to say, they also then initialed these items that we had talked about. So again, if they came back on and didn't do a home inspection for some reason. Not only do we have the buyer due diligence checklist, we're gonna have this where we've recommended that they should do it.
The reason I'm asking about the termite is because I read a while ago in the newspaper when I bought it. So that-
Yeah.
That some buyers were very upset because they buy a property that was infested with termites and they didn't know.
Yeah. Sure.
My question is we're on the listing side and we have a buyer that comes in unrepresented. To cover us, or these things we should maybe just give them, not necessarily make them sign, but like present, be like, hey, these are things our brokerage. Says you need to be
Yeah, I
aware of as a buyer. So that you have record and receipt of an email about sending, so if they
Yes.
said, well, you didn't tell me I could do this, like, well, I sent you documents.
Yep.
Showing that you can do these
The,
things.
the other thing I would recommend in that scenario is, so, and where I got this from was, I used to work at Coldwell Banker years ago. And we had an attorney on staff there and he was selling his own house and a buyer came in that was unrepresented. And they told him, we're not gonna do an inspection. And so he told me, he took the seller disclosures and he said, I checked yes on almost every single thing on the seller disclosures. Because the fact that they weren't doing an inspection, he said it would be a scenario if they went to court and tried to say, hey, I didn't know, blah, blah, blah. He could say, well, right here, I told him that we had, cracks in our foundation or whatever. And,
Yeah.
and they went ahead with it. So yes, I would say it would be a good idea to say, I know you're unrepresented, but here's some things you might want to
Yeah,
consider.
we just have some lots in Eagle Mountain. We have had a few unrepresented buyers and people are like, well, I don't need a agent for land. And we're like. Yeah, but I'm doing a piece of work. You're gonna
Exactly.
hold me accountable for things that I'm not your agent. but I'm
Exactly.
responsible for, so.
Yeah, I think it would be a good idea to just say, here's an example of some of the things you might want to test for. Like, I mean, the fact that
I
they're
know
choosing not to have an agent.
we have an offer coming in that's gonna be unrepresented that I heard Jessica
Yeah.
talking about. I was like, no.
Yeah, I probably would.
I just got a question.
Yeah,
Are we supposed to have the buyers sign all these other agreements beyond establishing agency? If it's just a first meeting agreement that we're trying to say, I'm gonna work with you from now on? I mean, houses.
it's up to you.
No subject matter even at play yet.
Yeah, so it's up to you if you wanted to have, well, let me back up, with the exception of the due diligence, because let me show you, let me go back here. On the, oops, it was- just remember, and I guess maybe I should look on here. But I think, doesn't section 14 say, yeah, the entire agreement. So so here's what to answer your question, look at section 14 of our agreement. Which says, the exclusive buyer broker agreement, including the buyer due diligence checklist. Wire fraud alert disclosure and any additional addendum. So at a minimum, when you have them sign this, have them sign. The exclusive buyer broker, the due diligence checklist and the wire fraud alert. Disclosure, because that's what in section 14 says, that's what constitutes this buyer broker agreement.
So those three things.
So at a minimum, have them do those three. The receipt acknowledgement, I would say, I would do that on each property. That you come across, so this form, the receipt acknowledgement of due diligence, I would do that one for every time you wrote an offer on the property. For each property you wrote an offer, not everyone you showed, but everyone you wrote an offer. All right, confirmation of earnest money. So this one is gonna be filled out when you receive the earnest money, okay? So as soon as you receive the earnest money, you're gonna fill this out. And, put in the buyer's agent, brokerage, seller's agent, brokerage, the property address. that you're confirming that in reference to the purchase contract with a reference date of blank to the buyer and seller. Confirms that on this date, the buyer's brokerage received their earnest money and how we got it. And then sign it. Okay? Limited agency, yeah, go ahead.
I've always had a question for Ernest.
Yeah.
When we do it through Ernest, once you get the notification that the wire has been like sent, because it'll like pop up in Dotloop. Can you do this? You can send it to the
Yes,
agent.
correct.
Okay.
Yep. All right, next is the limited agency consent form. So on this form, you're gonna put in the names of the buyer, the seller, the agent representing the buyer, agent representing the seller, the name of the brokerage, the property address. And then, let's see. Here's what I want to point out to you on this one. Let me see how far I want to go. Just do that. Okay. So on this, here's what I want to just point out is on limited agency. That it's basically saying a limited agent has fiduciary duties to both parties, right? However, those duties are limited because the agent can't provide to both parties undivided loyalty, full confidentiality, and full disclosure of all information known to the agent. For this reason, a limited agent must remain neutral in their representation of the seller and the buyer and may not disclose to either party information likely to weaken the bargaining position of the other, such as the highest price the buyer will pay or the lowest seller would accept. Okay, so I just want to make sure you guys understand during limited agency, the ones that become limited are undivided loyalty, full confidentiality, and full disclosure. Okay. All right, and then section 6 talks about an in-house sale where it's saying basically if both agents were within Everest, that's what this would constitute as an in-house sale. And so each agent still represents their client, but the brokerage is limited. And then this part just talks about potential conflicts of that. And where these conflicts come into play, usually on limited agency, is agents will come or walk around the office. Oh, I just got this listing and they're really desperate. They need to get it sold. Like we feel like we can walk around and say that to agents within our own company, but you still kind of could be weakening your client's bargaining position by doing that. So this is just disclosing there are potential conflicts in an in-house sale because agents may have already shared stuff like that. So
Ross?
Yeah.
To be considered the in-house sale is for agents in this particular brokerage, Everest.
Yes.
Not other Century 21s, whatever.
correct. Yeah, if the agent is with Century 21 Everest, it would be a limited agency. If they were with like Century 21 Harmon that was in Provo, then yeah, that's not going to be limited agency. Yep. All right, next then, section 9 is where we're either going to say there's one agent representing the seller or seller and buyer, or there's two agents, in which case one agent represents the seller, the other the buyer, but then like I said, the brokerage is limited. Okay. And on that, buyer and seller are going to sign and then either agent. So if you check the box for two agents, either one can sign this, doesn't matter.
You have two agents, and you, I guess, you decide how you split the commission, I guess, or it goes, overall, you guys split commission equally.
But it's still going to be whatever was offered on the MLS.
I mean, like between the two agents, though, like, say, like, me and Lou's going to go together, like, there's.
So agent-
Oh, that's different though.
Okay.
What you're talking about is different than
Okay,
this. This is saying that if I had the listing and you brought the buyer.
Yeah.
Then I would be
Okay.
the
so-
seller's agent, you're the buyer's. But yeah, if you and Luz together came to me and said, hey, we're representing somebody to buy your listing. I would still get the listing side of the commission and then you guys would split the buyer side however you wanted. Yeah, whatever you guys came up. Is that what you're asking?
Yeah.
Okay. All right, next, wire fraud alert disclosure.
Russ,
Yes,
just one critical thing on that, limited needs to be considered at the time that the offer is submitted.
correct. Yes, thank you. Yeah, if you're doing limited agency, make sure you're doing it at the time that the offer is submitted, not after the fact, because the whole point of it is letting the seller know this is going to be a limited agency situation and telling them about it after the fact they could come back later on and go, hey, I didn't know. So, all right,
So, just quick question.
yeah, no, you're good.
With the dispute or problem that you're having of that case. That they didn't have a buyer broker agreement and. And what you explained that you are having a problem now, who's going to cover the attorney fees?
Yeah, so the way,
But
basically the agent's responsible.
But
to
my
pay.
observation to that one is. When we are doing paperwork, it doesn't in here requiring that the paperwork be submitted. So they say, hey, you are missing an
Yep.
important document is not here.
Yep.
So how come that didn't take place?
Well, no, it probably did take place, but just because the company says to you, hey, we're missing this document, doesn't mean you're gonna go get it. But we're just saying, in order for you to get paid, we need this document.
Okay,
So,
so the company can still flag
well,
it.
and the truth is on that particular one, we're talking about that scenario. He was still negotiating the offers and that one never got accepted. So I don't know. I'll have to go look at the dot loop to see. I don't know if he even actually ended up putting it in. They probably did because of him writing the offer, but
Anyway, I just was wondering.
yeah, no, it probably was flagged that we were missing that. Just haven't done it yet. Now the buyer's probably not gonna sign it. So. All right, wire fraud alert disclosure. The purpose of this is to letting your clients know, so make sure you're having these conversations with your clients of letting them know that. You know, once we get a property under contract, don't be surprised if you get an email or a text or a phone call from somebody trying to tell you the wiring instructions have changed. And just let them know that they're not gonna change, like it's very unlikely. And that before they send a wire, they should verify with you that they've got the right wiring instructions, all that kind of stuff, okay? Because we had an agent that was with our company that she had left. She left our company. She was buying a house to do it as a flip, so she was gonna be paying cash $150,000 on a house. Got an email saying, hey, our wiring instructions have changed. Here's where you need to wire the money. She wired $150,000 to the wrong wiring instructions. Luckily, the title company that was handling it caught it within like minutes, and I don't remember the details, but she was able to get it back because of, luckily, like it should have been gone, but the reason being is once you send a wire, it doesn't immediately just go, like it goes to the bank usually, and then they have to approve it. They caught it before the bank approved it. Luckily, if the bank had approved it, her money would have been gone. So anyway, which means also your paycheck, your commission is gone.
So we always tell people, we will never tell you wiring instructions, we will never send you wiring instructions. If anybody reached out via email saying they're us with wiring instructions, it's not us. You need to call the title company, they'll give it to you at closing. Please, if you have any questions, call us to verify. But most of the time, if you call us and say, hey, we got this email from title, I'm gonna say, call title.
Yeah, call that.
I don't know.
Yeah. And the other thing I would add to that is don't call the phone number that's on the email.
Yeah, we
Actually, yeah,
give them the like,
okay, good.
here's the direct number to
Yeah,
title.
this is
If you
who-
have questions, you need to call this.
Yeah,
number.
because the problem is the emails they send now have a phone number on it, and if somebody were to call the phone number, they'll answer it as if they were North Star Title or whatever, even though it might not be, so. All right, good. Next is the affiliated business arrangement disclosure. So this form is, you're gonna fill it out and have them sign. Basically, what it is telling them is that Inspiro and North Star Title are sister companies to us. And I do want to point out to you, like sometimes agents are hesitant on this form. Because they're like, well, my client's not gonna use North Star, they're not gonna use Inspiro. Notice up here, it does say you are not required to use these listed providers, right? And then it also says there are frequently other settlement service providers available with similar services. You're free to shop around. So by them signing it, they're not agreeing to use them. It's just their RESPA requires, because we have a sister relationship with them, the companies, that we disclose that relationship. Okay, so every client needs to sign it. And sometimes people will say, well, but if they're not using them, what does it matter? But we've had scenarios where maybe they were using a different lender and then it falls apart and they took them down to Inspiro and then closed with them. So we just say, just get it signed on every transaction, letting them know it's an option. They don't have to use them, but we would love if they did. All right. Next, lead-based paint, acknowledgement and disclosure. When do we have to use this for? Properties that were built when?
1978.
Prior to.
Prior to.
Okay, good. So that's the key thing is, if the property was built in 1978, you don't need it or newer, but prior to 1978. Now, here's the thing. It wouldn't hurt if you did it on a property built in 1978. In fact, I've done a lot of foreclosures where I helped banks sell properties. And even if the property was built last year, they still will include this disclosure. The banks will have the buyer sign a lead-based paint disclosure because they don't know if it had it or not. And even though it won't because it was built last year, they still do it. So the point being is you need it 1978 or older properties. Anything built newer than that, you don't need, but you're gonna put in the address of the property up here. The seller is gonna initial either this box saying they know of lead-based paint, or they're gonna initial that they have no knowledge of lead-based paint. Then they're gonna initial that they provided the buyer with records or reports that they have, or that they have no reports or records about it. Okay? So one of these two and one of these two, they're gonna initial. The buyer then is gonna acknowledge that they've received the copies above, that they've received the pamphlet, Protect Your Family from Lead in the Home, so make sure that you're sending that to them through .loop. They're gonna initial that they've read the lead warning up here in section 1. And then they're going to initial either that they're gonna take a 10-day opportunity to test, in which case you'll need the lead-based paint addendum. Or they'll initial down here that they're gonna waive that. So just know they're gonna initial this or this. If they initial up here, you also then need the lead-based paint addendum. So just keep in mind, the disclosure is required on every property built before 1978. You only use the addendum if they're gonna if they're gonna test for lead-based paint, then you need the addendum. If they're not, you don't.
So one time we were on the buying side and the lead-based paint disclosure they sent us was like really old. Like, I was like, what is this? It doesn't look right.
Yeah.
I looked and it was like from 1990 something.
Okay.
Should you like that, hey, can you can you have your seller fill out the updated form? This one's just,
Yeah, I would say yes. If there is
Okay.
an updated form, you should have them do it.
I just was like,
At the end of the day, though, I would say to satisfy the law on it, as long as it covered all of this stuff,
I
you
think
probably
there
were
was-
okay.
there was like a few sections missing, so it was that old, where
Yeah.
I was like.
Yeah,
Where?
if there was things missing, I would say for sure. The main thing is that it had as long as it had a spot that the seller was saying
Mhm.
we know of or we don't. But with that being said, if there's an updated form, use the updated form. Okay. All right. The next thing is the listing agent is gonna initial this box that they've informed the seller of their obligation to disclose, and then everybody gets to sign it. So this is the form, both buyer sell, seller sell, sign or sell, buyer sign, seller sign, agent sign, everybody gets to sign. Okay? All right, last form is the commission agreement, okay, or commission. Report, sorry. Okay, so and I'm just gonna quickly go through how to fill this out. So you're gonna put in the address of the property that you're closing on, the buyer's name, the seller's name, the title company, if it's a resident. So any of these ones that look like this, the boxes that look like, have these kind of, I don't know what color it looks like up there. Tan, I guess. Looks more green on mine, but any of these are drop downs. So if you click on it, it'll be turned into a drop down. So if you were doing a commercial, you would click on this, it would be commercial or a lease, or select that. Okay, so then the next thing is you're gonna put in what the purchase price is, and is the commission gonna be based off gross, net, or a flat amount? So you click on this. If default, it should be on gross, but if it's gonna be net, click on this box and it'll pop open to show that you can select net or flat amount. Okay. what's the commission percentage that you're gonna get, you're gonna put in there. If there's a commission to an outside referral company, so if you're paying somebody a referral fee, you're gonna select on that. If that's outside of our company. If you're doing a commission advance, you would click on that to say yes, but just remember, commission advances are kind of like payday loans, you're gonna pay a huge amount of interest on them. The admin fee collected, so you're gonna put in the amount that you collected, so on our buyer broker I had up on the screen was $4.95, so if you collected $4.95, put $4.95. How much of the earnest money is being held at Everest? You'll put in the amount there. And if at title, for some reason, you gave a credit to the buyer to get the deal closed, $500 or something, you'd put that in. So this is the amount then of what the check we should get from the title company should be. Okay. From that, then you're gonna now select how's the commission being split. If you're just a single agent, then you do that. If you're on a team, you're gonna click on this, it'll bring up a drop down that you can select team. And then it'll also open up another box over here. You'll put in your name here. It's gonna deduct $2.95 from whatever was put in up here. So if for some reason you didn't collect the $2.95, and you would have 0 in here. It's then gonna deduct from your commission the $2.95. Okay. So now here's where the base commission is. So you'll notice up here it was $9,295. Subtracted out the $2.95. So here's what the base commission is gonna be.
So Ross, if in there, instead of the 295 was before something that we saw here, 495, right?
Oh.
The company collects the full 495.
So yeah, if it said $4.95 right here, it's then gonna, so then this would have said $9,495. Then down here, it would have subtracted out the $2.95, so this would have said $9,200.
You get the difference.
You get it.
Yeah.
Oh, I
Make
see.
it
On
higher.
Oh, I see, because
On your split.
I didn't know if the company collects the extra money.
No,
Oh,
anything above $2.95 goes on whatever. Make sure you're here, because sometimes agents will come back and go, hey, I thought I was getting the whole $200 or whatever. But in this case, if it was $4.95, you would get the 200, you would get whatever your split of the 200 is.
Okay.
And just to confirm, if it's like a VA loan or like a
Oh, yeah.
reload that you can't charge.
That's
you-
right.
You don't get charged that 295.
That's right, yeah, if like you were doing a VA loan, they won't allow you to do that, so you would put 0 up here. And then you won't have to pay the $2.95
Oh, if it's a VA.
if it's a VA,
Okay.
or, yeah, there's a few other types, but yeah, any of those. If you can't charge it, if it's not allowed, then it'll be waived. Okay, so then next you're gonna put in whatever your split is. So in this case, if you're on a 70-30 split, you're gonna put in the 30% here. So, because this is saying how much of the commission is going to Everest. So you put in Everest side of the split right there. Then it'll calculate out, take that out. It's gonna subtract out the 6% franchise fee. If you were paying the $2.95, this is where it would then show that. And then if you want to donate to the foundation, the default's $21, but whatever, you can change it to whatever you want. And then if you're using a transaction coordinator, this is where the fee and who it goes to goes. But if you're using a transaction coordinator, you should not be filling this out.
Yeah.
If you are filling it out, you might be. They'll appreciate you doing their job, I guess. So that's one of the advantages to using a transaction coordinator is you don't have to fill this out. They'll take care of it.
And it's murder.
And then this tells you what your expected check should be, and then if you have direct deposit, you would click on the drop down here and change it to yes. All right. Questions?
When is that page built? Is that what offer? Or
Which page?
this last one we just did?
Oh, no, you're gonna fill out the commission report
That's just for.
Um, just before closing. Yeah, that's just an internal form that you're gonna do. And so, yeah, you will fill that out just before you.
Or geez.
Yeah, or your TC will do it for that, but just before you close. All right, questions? Okay, everybody signed in, right? And on Zoom, you guys all put in the chat box, hopefully. And so, okay, so just a reminder, on Thursday, we're gonna play Jeopardy. We're gonna play a game. And thank Marcy for saying we should have treats, because we'll probably have some, but hopefully I'll remember. I should. Send me an email. And then, so for you guys on Zoom, if you can be here in person, do it, because it'll be a lot more fun for the game. But it ends up being very competitive. So anyway, that's the plan for Thursday. Sound good? Okay, thanks for being here.
I have a really quick question for you. It's off the wall.
Okay.
So it's not
Go ahead.
really pertinent to anyone else if they want to leave, but my question is, if someone's this is again off the wall, if someone's a member of the NAR because their brokerage in this state in Utah is member of NAR and UAR and all that, do they have to represent themselves in another state as a member of the NAR?
That is a good question. I
So
would
my
say
question,
no.
my question is, I'm actually also finishing up my license in Texas because I have interest there. And the NAR actually makes it illegal for net listings, but Texas is one of the few states that allows for net listings.
Really?
I believe it's illegal in Utah.
Yes, it is.
Yeah, but Texas and Florida, it's completely kosher. But the
Really?
NAR says it's not. So could
Wow.
someone like me just be like, well, I don't want to be part of the NAR in Texas?
That's a good question. I would say you probably need to ask them, but my
Fair enough.
my thought though is, regardless of what state you're in, you are a member of the National Association of Realtors. So I would think joining there, if you're with a brokerage that was with the Texas Association of Realtors, you wouldn't have to pay the NAR fee again because you're already a member of that. So
Mhm.
I would double check with somebody in Texas, but my belief is you are, regardless of what state you're in part of the National Association of Realtors.
Okay, fair enough. Well,
Yep.
thank you for that.
Yeah, you're welcome. So a net listing though, for you guys that were asking, that would be like if you went and said to somebody, I'm gonna sell your house for X, and anything above that, I get to keep as a commission. And apparently that's legal in Texas, so
It's
let's all
legal
go
in
to
Texas.
Texas.
and It's a pretty good way of making money.
Let's say that again, Christian, we couldn't hear you.
I said I mean, the NAR claims it's like a predatory business practice, but it's legal there and it's a good way that a lot of people make money. But again, people who aren't advertising it as the NAR.
Yeah, oh, that's crazy. Cool. Okay, guys, thanks, see ya. Thanks.
Thank you.